The house that night felt like a breath held too long, quiet, trembling, alive in its stillness. A single lamp glowed from the corner, its soft light spreading over the wooden walls like a thin layer of warmth, trying to chase away the cold. Outside, the wind brushed through the bamboo leaves, carrying with it the faint scent of rain that had fallen earlier in the evening. Lytutien sat by the window, her slender frame leaning slightly against the carved chair, her fingers clasped together in her lap, pale and trembling, as though she were afraid even her own heartbeat might disturb the fragile calm. Her face, illuminated by the warm light, looked both gentle and weary. The faint shadows beneath her eyes told stories of sleepless nights, of waiting that never seemed to end. From the kitchen came the soft clinking of porcelain, the rhythm of someone who had long learned to move quietly through pain. A moment later, Mother Loy appeared, her steps steady, her eyes kind. She carried a bowl of rice porridge, steam rising in lazy curls that filled the room with the scent of ginger and comfort. Setting it down on the table, she reached for Tien's hands. Her touch was firm but tender, like a mother holding together what the world kept trying to break. "Eat, my child," she whispered. Her voice trembled slightly, not from age, but from love. Tien's lips quivered. "I'm grateful, Mother, but—" She stopped, her voice caught between breath and tears. "I can't stop worrying about him. Jack leaves every morning and never says where he's going. I'm scared, Mother. Scared something will happen." Mother Loy squeezed her hands tighter, eyes soft yet filled with strength. "Jack is a man," she said slowly. "He carries burdens we cannot see. He keeps his silence, not because he doesn't trust you, but because he wants to protect you. You must believe that, child." Tien lowered her gaze. The words were meant to soothe, but instead, they unraveled the quiet ache she had tried so hard to contain. Her tears fell silently, slipping down her cheeks like rain tracing old paths on the window pane. She leaned into Mother Loy's shoulder, and the older woman wrapped her arms around her, gently stroking her back in small circles. No words, just the shared language of love and fear. Upstairs, the faint creak of floorboards marked Jack's presence. In the half-dark of his study, he sat motionless for a moment, his jaw tight, phone pressed to his ear. The glow from the desk lamp threw sharp lines across his face, a man torn between duty and dread. "I need a name." His voice was low but edged like steel. "Someone is pulling the strings. I won't let this go. The response was a silence too long to be safe. Then, a voice calm, almost amused. "Jack, some truths destroy more than they save. Be careful what you seek." Jack's grip tightened on the phone until his knuckles whitened. "I don't care. I'll face whatever comes. I won't let anyone hurt her again." He ended the call abruptly, the weight of unspoken danger settling over him like smoke. For a long while, he sat there, staring at nothing. The ticking clock, the only sound in the room. Then, he closed his eyes and exhaled a sound that carried both fury and fatigue. He didn't know how much longer he could keep the darkness from reaching her. Downstairs, Mother Loy hummed softly as she refilled Tien's bowl. "Eat while it's warm," she said, her voice the anchor holding the room together. Tien nodded, her lips moving in a silent prayer. Later, when the lights dimmed and the house sank into silence again, Tien stood by the window, looking at the faint outline of the road disappearing into the night. Somewhere beyond it, she imagined Jack walking alone under the weight of secrets he could never share. And yet, in that fragile stillness, she whispered not to him, but to the darkness itself, "Please, keep him safe." The wind stirred gently. As if answering, she closed her eyes, pressing her palms together, letting the quiet become her prayer. If you've ever waited for someone in silence, with fear and love tangled together, you'll understand how heavy one night can feel. Tell me, what would you have done in her place? The following morning arrived shrouded in pale light, the kind that lingers before dawn, fully decides to break. Jack stood before the mirror, his reflection hazy in the half-fog that drifted through the open window. His tie hung loose around his neck. His eyes were sharp, but sleeplessness dulled their edge. Downstairs, the faint rattle of bowls told him that Mother Loy was already awake, preparing breakfast for a house that rarely ate together anymore. He adjusted his vest with the precision of a man trying to control at least one thing in a world that kept slipping out of reach. Each button fastened like a promise to stay strong for her, for himself, for whatever was still worth protecting. When he stepped out of the room, the air was heavy with the smell of jasmine tea and boiled ginger. Lytutien stood by the window again, as if her heart could only breathe where the light touched the glass. Her hair fell softly down her shoulders, and her pale blue dress made her look even more fragile against the morning haze. "Morning," he said quietly. She turned, managing a small smile that never reached her eyes. "You didn't sleep again." He wanted to lie, to say he had, but the truth sat between them like a ghost neither could banish. He walked over and reached for her hand. It was cold as always when she was anxious. "I'll be gone most of the day," he murmured. Her fingers tightened around his for a second, then slipped away. "Be careful," she said. Only that. Simple words, but they carried all the prayers she couldn't voice. Jack hesitated. There was so much he wanted to say, that he loved her, that the danger was closer than she knew, that he might not come home tonight, but words would only feed her fear. So instead, he straightened his shoulders, gave her a look that was meant to reassure, and failed and left. The sound of the door closing echoed longer than it should have. Outside, the city was just waking. Vendors opened their stalls. The smell of bread and coffee drifted through narrow streets. To anyone watching, Jack looked like any other businessman heading to work. But under that calm exterior, every step he took was a calculation, one wrong move, and everything would unravel. He drove through the morning traffic with a stillness that bordered on rage. The voice from last night still played in his head. Some truths destroy more than they save, but he had already seen what silence could destroy. By the time he reached the old warehouse at the edge of the industrial district, the sun was climbing, turning the river beside it into a strip of molten gold. A man waited near the entrance, tall, clean-cut, wearing dark glasses even in the shade. Jack recognized him immediately. Min, one of his oldest associates, and once his closest friend. "You shouldn't have come," Min said, his voice flat but his eyes watchful. Jack gave a humorless smile. "You called me," Min exhaled, looking past him at the restless city. "Things have changed. The man you're after, he isn't just a rival. He's connected to people who don't forgive." "I'm not asking for forgiveness," Jack said. "I want his name." There was a pause, the kind that lives between loyalty and betrayal. Then Min reached into his coat and handed him a folded piece of paper. "You didn't get this from me, but..." Jack took it, but before he could speak, Min added, "If you keep going, you'll lose her." Jack's jaw tightened. "If I stop, I'll lose myself." When he drove away, the paper trembled slightly in his hand. On it, a single name, one he had hoped never to see again. Back at home, Lytutien tried to fill the silence with small acts of care. She brewed tea, rearranged the flowers by the window, folded his shirts even though they were already neat. But the longer she tried to busy her hands, the louder her heart beat. Every noise from outside made her glance toward the door. Every passing hour added another layer of dread. Mother Loy noticed. She said nothing, only placed a small prayer bead bracelet into Tien's palm. "It was blessed years ago," she said softly. "Your father-in-law wore it during the war." It reminded him that fear has no power over faith. Tien nodded, her eyes glassy. She slipped the beads around her wrist and felt their smooth coolness. Somehow, it steadied her. Meanwhile, Jack's car cut through the afternoon light, like a shadow refusing to disappear. He followed the trail that led from one name to another, a string of contacts, each more reluctant than the last. By dusk, he found himself in front of an abandoned office near the riverbank, the last place that name had been seen. Inside, the air smelled of rust and damp paper. Dust motes floated like silent witnesses in the dying light. Jack's footsteps echoed through the empty corridor. Somewhere in the back, a door creaked open, and from the darkness, a low chuckle slipped out. "Still chasing ghosts, Jack?" The voice was familiar. Too familiar. He froze. "I thought you were gone." A man stepped into the light, half his face hidden by shadow. "Gone? No. Some of us just learn to live where light doesn't reach." Jack's hand clenched. "You're the one behind this." The man laughed softly. "Behind what?" "The truth. You can't destroy what's already in motion. Walk away, or she'll pay the price for your stubbornness." The air tightened between them. Jack didn't answer. He couldn't. He turned and walked out, his fists shaking, the sound of that laugh following him all the way to the car. Outside, the night had fallen. The city lights shimmered on the river, and somewhere far away, a temple bell rang soft, distant, but enough to pull his thoughts back home. He reached for his phone, opened Tien's photo, the one taken on their first trip after they married. Her smile was faint, shy, full of trust. That trust was what he was fighting for now, even if it meant burning everything else down. He put the phone away and drove into the night. At home, Tien lit a candle on the windowsill, the same one she always lit when he was late. The flame flickered wildly for a moment, then steadied. She watched it and whispered to the darkness, "Please bring him home safe." The candle's light trembled like an answer. Some people carry storms inside them, and love is the only thing keeping them from breaking apart. If you were Tien, would you still wait? The days that followed felt longer than the nights. Each sunrise came quietly, painting the walls in shades of gold and pale blue. But for Tien, morning no longer meant peace. It meant waiting for footsteps on the stairs, for the sound of Jack's voice calling her name. And when it didn't come, she would sit by the window again, watching the road that led into the mist, her heart pacing faster than time itself. On the fourth day, she woke before dawn. The sky outside was still gray, the air thick with the scent of wet leaves. She dressed in silence, her movements slow and deliberate. The wooden floor creaked faintly beneath her feet. When she reached the living room, Mother Loy was already there, sewing by the faint light of a candle. The older woman looked up, startled by her early presence. "Couldn't sleep again, my child?" Tien shook her head. Her voice came out soft, almost a whisper. "Mother, I want to go to the temple today." The candlelight flickered across Mother Loy's face, revealing a quiet understanding. She set the needle down and nodded gently. "Then go. The heart knows when it needs to kneel." Tien smiled faintly, though her eyes glistened. "Will you be all right here? I've lived through more storms than I can count," Mother Loy replied, her tone light, almost teasing. "But you still have faith to tend to. Go find your peace, daughter." By the time Tien stepped outside, the morning mist had begun to thin. She wrapped a shawl around her shoulders, the air cool and damp against her skin. The road that led up to the mountain temple was lined with bamboo and moss-covered stones. Each step she took seemed to echo in the stillness, as though the earth itself was listening. She passed the market square, now quiet after the early rush. The sound of a distant bell drifted through the air, calling monks to prayer. Somewhere nearby, incense smoke curled from a small roadside altar, its fragrance mingling with the smell of rain and soil. As she began the long climb up the temple path, the world seemed to fade away. The noise, the fear, the city, all that remained was the rhythmic sound of her breathing and the soft rustle of leaves. The steps were old, their edges worn smooth by countless pilgrims before her. Halfway up, she paused to rest. Her hands clutched the railing, her pulse quick but steady. She thought of Jack, how he used to tease her for being afraid of heights, how he would always turn back halfway just to make sure she was following. Now, the only thing ahead was silence. When she finally reached the temple gate, the sun had begun to break through the mist, scattering gold dust over the courtyard. The ancient wooden doors stood open, and inside, the chanting of monks filled the air like a heartbeat, calm, rhythmic, endless. Tien stepped inside. The scent of sandalwood enveloped her immediately, thick and soothing. Rows of candles flickered before a massive statue of the Buddha, whose serene gaze seemed to pierce through her turmoil. She knelt slowly, her knees pressing into the cool stone floor, and clasped her hands together. "Please," she whispered, "protect him. Protect Jack from whatever darkness follows him. I don't need wealth or comfort. I only need him to come home safe." Her voice broke, the words dissolving into quiet sobs. The tears fell freely, tracing a path down her cheeks, dripping onto the floor beneath her. For a long moment, there was only silence, the kind that stretches between the living and the divine. Then, a voice came from behind her, calm but deep, resonant like the echo of the bell. "Your sorrow is heavy, child." Tien turned sharply. Standing in the doorway was an old monk, his robes swaying gently in the breeze. His face was lined with years, but his eyes were clear, bright, like still water reflecting the morning sun. "I'm sorry," she said quickly, wiping her tears. "I didn't mean to disturb anyone." The monk smiled faintly and walked closer, each step slow and deliberate, no disturbance. The temple welcomes those who seek light, even if they come through the storm. He stopped in front of her, his gaze steady, kind. "Do not let fear consume what love has built. You have not been abandoned. Destiny does not cut its thread so easily." Her lips trembled. "Then, you mean he will come back?" The monk tilted his head slightly, as if listening to something beyond words. "In time," he said softly, "and when he does, your life will not be the same. The child you carry," Tien froze, breath catching in her throat. "Child?" The monk nodded, his smile deepening. "A boy. He is part of your blessing, a light that will arrive when your heart learns to trust again. Hold on to hope, daughter. That is what will guide him home." But the world around her seemed to still. For a heartbeat, she forgot how to breathe. Tears welled again, but this time they were different, softer, lighter, filled with something she hadn't felt in months. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Thank you, Master." He inclined his head, hands folded together. "Peace follows those who walk with love. Go now. The wind will carry your prayer." As Tien descended the long staircase from the temple, the sun broke fully through the clouds. The light was warm against her skin, almost like a gentle hand guiding her. The trees rustled as the wind swept through, and the sound of the distant bell seemed to echo in rhythm with her heartbeat. At the foot of the hill, she stopped and turned back. The temple stood bathed in gold, the monk now just a small figure by the doorway, his robes fluttering like a flame. She pressed her palms together, whispered one last thank you, and continued down the path. By the time she reached home, the day was already fading into amber. Mother Loy sat by the veranda, a needle glinting between her fingers. When she looked up and saw her daughter-in-law, something in her expression softened. "Your eyes," she said gently. "They're bright again." Tien smiled the kind of smile that comes after rain. "Mother," she said, sitting beside her, "I don't know how, but I feel peace. I feel like everything will be all right." Mother Loy nodded, placing her hand over Tien's. "The heavens do not forget those who love with a kind heart. Keep your faith, child. It is stronger than you think." The sound of the wind through the garden filled the pause that followed. Somewhere in the distance, thunder murmured softly, not a warning, but a reminder. Even storms can bring renewal. Sometimes faith isn't about knowing what will happen. It's about walking through the unknown and still believing light will find you. Tell me, if you were in her place, would you still have climbed those temple steps? Night had fallen by the time Lytutien returned from the temple. The road was still damp from a late drizzle, and the air carried that clean scent of wet soil and burning wood from distant hearths. Her shawl clung lightly to her shoulders, and each step home felt softer, lighter than when she had left. The old monk's words still echoed within her like a quiet bell ringing somewhere behind her heart. When she reached the gate, the house stood calm and glowing under the lantern light. The smell of lemongrass soup drifted through the windows, and she could see Mother Loy sitting by the veranda, mending one of Jack's shirts. The sight filled her chest with warmth. For a moment, she simply watched the older woman's steady hands, the thread glinting faintly in the golden light, and she realized how much love could hide in such small, ordinary gestures. "Mother," she called softly. Mother Loy looked up and smiled. "You're home." She put down her needle and beckoned. "Come sit. You look different." Tien sank down beside her, brushing the raindrops from her sleeves. "I went to the temple," she said, her voice gentle, steady, "and I prayed." Mother Loy nodded, as if she already knew. "And what did the heavens say?" Tien hesitated. "The monk told me not to be afraid, that destiny hasn't abandoned us. He said Jack will come back, and he said there will be a child, a son." For a heartbeat, the air stilled. The candle flame near them trembled slightly, then steadied again. "A son," Mother Loy repeated quietly, her lips parted, her eyes filling with something halfway between disbelief and joy. "Then the blessing has already begun." Tien nodded, tears threatening to fall again, but this time they were tears of release. "I don't understand it all, but I believe him. For the first time in a long while, I truly believe." Mother Loy reached over and took her hands. "Faith," she said softly, "is not about seeing the light. It's about trusting it's there, even when all you see is shadow." They sat together for a while, listening to the night hum with distant crickets and the faint rustle of trees. The air was cool, almost tender. For the first time in many days, Tien didn't feel alone. When the last candle burned low, they went inside. The house, once heavy with silence, now seemed to breathe again, a quiet rhythm of homecoming, of hope stitched slowly back together. Upstairs, in the dim light of the study, a shadow moved past the window. The door creaked softly open. "Jack?" Tien's voice was barely a whisper, but he heard it, that fragile sound that had anchored him through so many nights of uncertainty. He stepped inside. His clothes were damp, his shoulders heavy, his face pale from exhaustion. Yet when he looked at her, something inside him eased, as if all the miles he had walked, all the threats he had faced, finally found meaning in her gaze. "You're home," she said. He nodded, closing the door behind him. For now, the way he said it carried both truth and ache. He wanted to tell her everything about Min, about the warning, about the enemy that had begun to move again. But when he saw her standing there, eyes glistening with faith instead of fear, the words caught in his throat. Instead, she crossed the room and took his hand. Her fingers brushed against his warm, sure, alive. "You don't have to explain," she whispered. "I just need to know that you're safe." Jack stared at her, his jaw tightening. "I can't promise safety. Not yet, but I'll fight for it." "I know," she said. "I believe you." Something shifted between them then, a quiet understanding, deep and wordless. He reached up, cupped her face in his palms, and for a moment just looked at her, memorizing every detail, as though she were both his strength and his salvation. When he pulled her close, she didn't resist. Her head rested against his chest, and she could hear the wild, uneven rhythm of his heart, the sound of a man who had walked too far into darkness, but still found his way back to love. They stayed like that for a long time. The candle flickered low. The rain began again, soft and rhythmic against the window pane. Downstairs, Mother Loy watched from the staircase, her eyes glistening. She didn't speak. She only smiled faintly and returned to her sewing, whispering a quiet prayer under her breath. Later that night, after Jack had fallen into an exhausted sleep, Tien sat by the window once more. The rain had stopped, and the sky outside shimmered faintly with the reflection of temple bells ringing far away. She reached for the prayer beads on her wrist, letting them roll between her fingers. Her heart was calmer now, not because everything was certain, but because faith had replaced fear. The monk's words returned to her. "The thread of destiny has not been cut." She smiled softly. "Thank you," she whispered into the night. "Thank you for bringing him back to me." The candle's flame flickered once, then steadied like a nod from the universe. In the next room, Jack stirred, his hand instinctively reaching across the bed for hers. Even in sleep, he found her, and somewhere, beyond the walls of the quiet house, the world kept turning, carrying both light and shadow, joy and danger. But within that small space of love and prayer, everything felt suspended, safe, alive. When dawn finally came, the first rays of light spilled across the floorboards, touching her face. She closed her eyes, whispering a promise to the morning. "No matter what comes," she said, "we will endure." Outside, the wind rose softly through the garden, lifting the last petals of night away. Months passed. The storms that once haunted their nights had faded into distant murmurs, replaced by the soft rhythm of everyday life. The garden bloomed again, lilies along the fence, jasmine climbing the old trellis. The air around the house felt lighter now, touched with something new, something tender. Lytutien moved slowly through the yard, one hand resting on the curve of her growing belly. The early sunlight streamed through the branches, painting her in gold. She paused beneath the old tamarind tree where Jack used to hang the wind chimes. They tinkled faintly in the breeze, carrying their small, fragile song into the open sky. "Good morning," she whispered, as though speaking to both the wind and the child inside her. Inside the house, Mother Loy's laughter echoed softly as she arranged a tray of fruit on the altar. She hummed an old lullaby, her voice shaky but warm. Every day since the visit to the temple, she had begun her mornings this way, with gratitude. Gratitude that the house still stood, that love had returned to its rooms, that her son's eyes no longer carried only shadows. Jack stepped out onto the veranda, his shirt sleeves rolled to his elbows, his face calm but alert, as if part of him still listened for the echoes of danger that once surrounded them. Yet the lines at the corners of his eyes had softened. When he saw Tien standing under the tree, his lips curved into a quiet smile. He walked to her, his steps measured, careful not to disturb the peace she carried now. You shouldn't be out here too long, he said gently. Tien turned to him, her expression glowing with amusement. And miss the morning wind? The baby likes it. He reached out, touching her hand, then her belly, as though still astonished that something so delicate, so miraculous, could exist after all they had endured. He's strong, Jack murmured. Like his mother. She looked up at him, eyes shimmering, or stubborn, like his father. For a moment, their laughter mingled with the rustling of the trees, an ordinary sound, yet one that carried the weight of all their survival. Jack drew her closer, pressing his forehead against hers. You know, he said softly, that monk was right. Everything he said, it's happening. Tien nodded. He told me destiny hadn't forgotten us. Maybe we were never meant to escape the darkness, only to find our way through it. They stood like that for a while, wrapped in silence that no longer felt empty but sacred, the silence of two souls who had finally made peace with their story. A sudden sound broke their stillness, the temple bell ringing in the distance. Its tone drifted down the valley, carried by the wind, clear and resonant. Tien closed her eyes, letting the sound wash over her. Do you hear that? She said quietly. Every time the bell rings, I feel like it's calling to us, reminding us that peace isn't something you find. It's something you keep choosing. Every time. Jack looked at her, a faint smile playing on his lips. Then let's keep choosing it. He took her hand, guiding her back inside. Mother Loy was waiting by the table, 2 cups of tea, steaming beside a vase of fresh lotus flowers. She looked up and smiled, her gaze lingering on Tien's rounded belly. You're glowing today, she said. The child must feel your joy. Tien placed her hand over her heart. He feels the prayers too, Mother. Yours, mine, and maybe even the monk's. The older woman nodded slowly. A child born from love and faith, that is a blessed soul. They shared tea together, the 3 of them. Outside, sunlight spilled across the veranda, touching everything with warmth. The house, once heavy with sorrow, now seemed to hum with quiet life. The sound of spoons against cups, the whisper of leaves, the laughter that came easily again. Later that evening, when the first stars appeared, Tien sat by the window, the same spot where she had once wept for nights on end. But tonight, her tears were different, soft and full of gratitude. She could hear Jack outside, repairing the old fence. The steady rhythm of hammer and wood sounded like a heartbeat. Every strike reminded her that love could rebuild anything, even after the fiercest storms. She whispered softly to the life within her, You were the light I prayed for, the reason I never gave up. The baby moved a small, gentle flutter beneath her palm. She smiled, closing her eyes, letting that moment fill her completely. From somewhere beyond the hills, thunder murmured, distant but not threatening. The air carried the faint echo of temple bells again, the same tone that had guided her up the mountain months ago. And for the first time, she didn't feel fear, only peace. Jack stepped back inside, his hands dusty from work, his eyes soft when they met hers. It's almost done, he said. The fence, the repairs, everything. This place will finally be safe. Tien looked up, her lips parting in a smile that felt like sunrise. We already are. In my est. He sat beside her, and they watched the sky together, the clouds glowing faintly under the stars, the scent of wet earth still hanging in the air. He took her hand and kissed it, whispering, You saved me. She shook her head. No, she said. We saved each other. The wind moved through the trees outside, gentle and slow, carrying with it the same whisper that had once drifted down from the temple. The thread of destiny has not been cut, and in that moment, with the moonlight falling softly over their faces, with faith reborn in their hearts. It felt true. Their story was far from over. It was only beginning again, in quieter ways, in the growing life between them, in the unspoken prayers that would one day become lullabies, in the promise that love, once found, never really fades.